In a galaxy where war is waged with precision and strategy, one alien commander discovers a startling truth about humanity. Their strength lies not in advanced technology or flawless tactics, but in their unyielding resilience. When Commander Rick of the Nerone fleet arrives at Earth's West Horizon Training Academy, he expects to find a primitive and disorganized species. What he witnesses instead is a shocking and brutal transformation. Human cadets enduring relentless trials that forge them into warriors of unbreakable will. As chaos becomes their crucible, Rick must confront a terrifying realization. Humanity's greatest weapon isn't their arsenal. It's their ability to thrive in adversity. Will this revelation reshape the galaxy's understanding of warfare, or will it mark the dawn of humanity's dominance? Commander Rick, renowned for his strategic precision within the Nerone fleet, arrived at Earth's West Horizon Training Academy with his aide, Lieutenant Prin. The Nerone delegation expected a demonstration of advanced tactical theories, technological warfare techniques, and simulations akin to their own highly structured and logical training methods. However, as their transport landed, the scene that greeted them was nothing short of bewildering. The academy grounds were a mess of activity, drenched in pouring rain. Human cadets, clad in soaked uniforms, crawled through muddy fields while their instructors barked commands and insults in equal measure. The young recruits struggled under nets, climbed over slippery obstacles, and waded through trenches filled with water. To Rick, who was accustomed to the clean efficiency of Nerone training simulations, this chaos resembled primal torment rather than a professional military exercise. The unrestrained physicality of the scene seemed to defy logic and discipline, two pillars of Nerone military philosophy. Prin, ever observant, noted the disparity aloud. Her antennae twitched in unease as she voiced what Rick himself was grappling to understand. "Commander, I'm not sure this is what we anticipated," she said hesitantly, her tone a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Rick, folding his arms as he took in the disarray before him, responded with a deep frown. "What is this madness?" he demanded. "How can this possibly be considered training?" The answer came not from Prin, but from a human officer who approached through the rain. Major Brenhart, soaked yet cheerful, introduced himself with a firm handshake and an air of unshakable confidence. He welcomed Rick and Prin to the academy and, with a grin, explained that the chaos they were witnessing was part of Field Week, a critical training period designed to instill teamwork, resilience, and adaptability in the cadets. For Rick, this initial exposure to Earth's unconventional training methods was both shocking and perplexing. The stark contrast to the meticulous order of Nerone training left him unsettled. Yet it also planted the seeds of curiosity. What appeared chaotic and illogical on the surface seemed to serve a purpose that eluded his understanding, a purpose he was determined to unravel as the day unfolded. As Commander Rick and Lieutenant Prin continued their observations of the academy, Major Brenhart began explaining the purpose behind the muddy, rain-soaked chaos. What Rick had dismissed as disorder was, in fact, a carefully designed part of the Academy's curriculum called Field Week. Hart's explanation painted this grueling week as a cornerstone of human military training, where cadets were exposed to extreme physical and mental challenges meant to teach critical lessons. Hart elaborated that the exercises were not random acts of hardship, but deliberate tests of teamwork and resilience. Cadets were required to work together to navigate obstacle courses, crawl through muddy fields, and endure relentless rain. They had to overcome not just physical fatigue, but also the constant berating from their instructors, which Hart described as a method of simulating high-pressure environments. Rick listened with growing skepticism. To the Nerone, teamwork was cultivated through simulations where each participant's role was clearly defined and meticulously rehearsed. Watching human cadets flounder in the mud while shouting instructions at one another seemed like chaos disguised as training. What could they possibly learn from this? Rick asked, his tone edged with disbelief. Hart responded with enthusiasm, emphasizing that teamwork forged in adversity was far more enduring than what could be cultivated in controlled environments. When cadets were cold, wet, and exhausted, they were forced to rely on each other to accomplish their tasks. fostering a bond that went beyond mere cooperation. According to Hart, this approach built not just functional teams, but cohesive units that could endure the unpredictability of real combat. Despite Hart's explanation, Rick found the concept difficult to reconcile with the Nerone way of training. The Nerone fleet relied on precision and predictability, focusing on rehearsed maneuvers and simulations that left no room for chaos. In contrast, the human method seemed to embrace chaos as an essential element of preparation. Rick watched as a cadet, completely drenched and covered in mud, struggled to pull another cadet over an obstacle. Both were clearly exhausted, yet they persevered, their determination evident in every strained movement. Prin, observing the scene with her ever-curious demeanor, whispered, "Commander, they seem to thrive in adversity." Her antennae twitched as she jotted down notes, capturing the stark differences between human and Nerone philosophies. Rick, however, remained unconvinced. To him, the mud and rain symbolized inefficiency and recklessness, yet he couldn't entirely dismiss the cadets' evident determination and camaraderie. As Field Week unfolded before them, Rick began to understand that this exercise was not just about physical endurance. It was a psychological and emotional trial, designed to strip away individual egos and instill a collective will to succeed. Though he could not yet articulate it, Rick sensed that this form of training might hold an advantage that the Nerone fleet had overlooked. Still, he remained skeptical, his logical mind struggling to grasp the merits of what he had witnessed. After observing the chaos of Field Week, Commander Rick and Lieutenant Prin were introduced to what Major Bren Hart described as the Academy's most challenging and revered trial, the Crucible. This grueling obstacle course represented the pinnacle of human military training, a relentless gauntlet designed to push cadets to their absolute physical and mental limits. For Rick, whose understanding of training was rooted in precision and controlled scenarios, the Crucible was both baffling and deeply unsettling. Standing at the edge of the course, Rick took in the towering walls, barbed wire, rope climbs, and water-filled trenches that loomed before them. Cadets, visibly exhausted and drenched from the persistent rain, pushed themselves through the course with a mixture of determination and desperation. The air was filled with the sounds of instructors barking orders, the splash of water as cadets waded through trenches, and the occasional cry of frustration as one slipped off an obstacle. To Rick, the scene resembled a nightmare more than a training exercise. "What is the purpose of this?" Rick asked, his voice heavy with skepticism. Hart, with a note of pride in his tone, explained that the Crucible was the ultimate test of endurance, resilience, and adaptability. It was designed not just to strengthen the body, but to break down the cadets' mental and emotional barriers. By depriving them of food, sleep, and comfort, the Crucible forced cadets to confront their own limits and discover a strength they didn't know they possessed. Rick found this explanation incomprehensible. The Nerone fleet emphasized keeping soldiers in peak condition, well-fed, well-rested, and mentally sharp to ensure optimal performance. The idea of intentionally breaking one's own soldiers before they had even faced an enemy seemed not only counterproductive but cruel. "You starve them and keep them awake intentionally?" Rick asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Absolutely," Hart replied without hesitation. "Out there, on the battlefield, the enemy won't care if they're hungry or tired. This teaches them to push past the point where they think they can't go any further." He gestured toward a group of cadets struggling to pull themselves over a high wooden wall. Despite their exhaustion, each cadet helped the next over the obstacle, their teamwork growing stronger with every challenge. "It's not just about physical endurance," Hart continued. "It's about teaching them that they can survive and thrive in adversity." As Rick watched a cadet slip into a muddy trench, only to pull themselves out and keep going, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of curiosity. Despite the brutal conditions, the cadets displayed an almost frightening determination. Their eyes, though weary, burned with resolve. It was a mindset Rick had never seen in Nerone training, where discipline and precision were paramount, but hardship was avoided. Prin, observing the cadets closely, noted their resilience in her ever-expanding report. "Commander, she whispered, her voice tinged with unease. They don't just endure this. They seem to embrace it. Her antennae twitched furiously as she scribbled her observations, struggling to reconcile the chaos with its apparent effectiveness. Hart, noticing Rick's silence, added with a smile, "This is where we separate soldiers from warriors. The ones who make it through the crucible don't just survive, they earn their place." For Rick, this revelation was both disturbing and thought-provoking. The Nerone approach to training focused on eliminating inefficiency and mitigating risks. Yet here, humans seem to embrace risk and chaos, wielding them as tools to forge unyielding strength. As the cadets continued their relentless climb, stumble, and recovery, Rick began to see the logic behind the madness. Though he could not yet fully accept it, he was beginning to understand why human soldiers were so feared. After witnessing the physically and mentally grueling challenges of Field Week and the Crucible, Commander Rick and Lieutenant Prin were led by Major Bren Hart to yet another phase of human training: survival training. If the earlier exercises had unsettled Rick with their apparent chaos and hardship, what he saw next left him utterly incredulous. The delegation arrived at the edge of a dense forest where cadets, grouped in small teams, were engaged in tasks that seemed more suited to a primitive past than a modern military force. Cadets wielded only basic tools, knives, ropes, and their bare hands, as they scavenged for resources and constructed makeshift shelters. The sight of trainees struggling to fashion rudimentary shelters from branches and leaves, completely devoid of advanced equipment or provisions, was deeply unsettling for Rick. "What are they doing?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They're building shelters," Hart replied with a cheerful tone that seemed incongruous with the harsh conditions. "They'll spend the night out here using nothing but what they can find. No equipment, no comforts, just their wits and whatever the environment provides." Rick took a step back, visibly appalled. The Nerone fleet prided itself on its advanced technology, ensuring soldiers were never without the tools they needed to succeed. The idea of sending trainees into the wilderness with nothing but a knife seemed reckless at best, barbaric at worst. "You send them into the wild with almost nothing?" he asked, struggling to mask his disapproval. "Exactly," Hart replied, his grin widening. "The environment is the best teacher. Out here, they learn to adapt, improvise, and survive. Nature has a way of sorting the strong from the weak." The contrast between human and Nerone philosophies was stark. In Nerone training, survival skills were taught through controlled simulations, with access to technology that mimicked real-world challenges but minimized risk. Humans, on the other hand, embraced raw, unfiltered survival scenarios, pushing their cadets to face the unpredictability of nature itself. Rick couldn't fathom such an approach, viewing it as unnecessarily hazardous and chaotic. Yet, as he observed the cadets, he noticed something remarkable. Despite the harsh conditions, they displayed an unwavering determination. Cadets worked together, sharing the few resources they had and improvising solutions to their challenges. One group struggled to start a fire in the pouring rain, their hands trembling from the cold, but they refused to give up. Another team, drenched and shivering, huddled under a hastily constructed lean-to, their camaraderie apparent in their shared laughter despite the discomfort. Prin, watching the scene with her ever-curious eye, jotted furiously in her notebook. "Commander," she whispered, her voice tinged with unease. "They seem to draw strength from this adversity." Her antennae twitched as she struggled to comprehend how the cadets could not only endure such conditions but thrive in them. Hart, noticing their incredulity, explained further. "It's not just about survival," he said. "It's about developing the mindset that no matter what the situation, they can find a way to endure. When you strip away comforts and force them to rely on themselves and each other, they discover what they're truly capable of." For Rick, this explanation was both unsettling and thought-provoking. The Nerone approach to survival training relied on advanced technology to eliminate uncertainty, ensuring soldiers could overcome any challenge with efficiency. Yet here, humans embraced uncertainty, using it as a crucible to forge adaptability and resilience. The notion that hardship could be an effective teacher was alien to Rick, but the determination he saw in the cadets made him question whether the Nerone fleet's reliance on technology had left them vulnerable in ways they hadn't considered. As the rain continued to fall, Rick found himself unable to dismiss the effectiveness of the human approach. The cadets, though cold and weary, displayed a grit and resourcefulness that he could not ignore. In their embrace of adversity, they were not just surviving, they were preparing for the unpredictable nature of war. For Rick, the experience was a sobering reminder that strength came in many forms, and the human approach to survival training was one he would not soon forget. Having witnessed the physical rigor and primal survival instincts fostered by earlier training exercises, Commander Rick and Lieutenant Prin were next escorted to the Live Fire training grounds. Major Bren Hart introduced this phase with pride, describing it as one of the most critical elements of the Academy's program. For Rick, what followed was an unsettling glimpse into humanity's fearless approach to preparing its soldiers for the brutal realities of combat. The Live Fire range sprawled across a vast field filled with towering barricades, trenches, and scattered debris that mimicked the chaos of a war zone. Cadets darted between cover, dodging simulated enemy fire while returning shots with rifles and grenades. The air was thick with smoke, the deafening cracks of gunfire, and the occasional echo of controlled explosions. The entire environment was crafted to disorient and overwhelm, forcing cadets to react under pressure. Rick watched in silence as a cadet narrowly avoided a simulated explosion, tumbling into a trench before scrambling back to his feet. Another cadet fired at a moving target while simultaneously ducking under barbed wire, their face a mask of determination despite their evident exhaustion. It was chaos, but it was chaos with purpose, a controlled simulation of the unpredictable dangers of war. Why take such risks in training? Rick asked, his voice betraying both his curiosity and unease. The Nerone fleet relied on virtual simulations and safe environments to prepare soldiers, ensuring that injuries were minimized. Exposing cadets to live fire and physical hazards seemed reckless in comparison. Hart's demeanor shifted, his grin fading into a serious expression. "Because war is dangerous, Commander," he said. "If they don't learn to handle it here, how will they survive out there?" He gestured toward the cadets as they navigated the obstacles, some stumbling but always pressing forward. This isn't just about shooting targets. It's about teaching them to think, adapt, and act decisively under fire. The philosophy behind this training was starkly different from anything Rick had encountered. Nerone training prioritized precision and efficiency, focusing on minimizing risk to ensure soldiers remained at peak performance. Human training, however, seemed to embrace risk, using it to build resilience and foster an unshakable resolve. Rick found himself questioning whether the Nerone fleet's emphasis on safety had left their soldiers unprepared for the chaos of real combat. As Rick observed, he couldn't help but notice the cadets' unwavering determination. Even when a cadet stumbled or faltered, they quickly recovered, their focus never wavering. Instructors barked orders with a mix of urgency and encouragement, pushing the cadets to their limits, but never allowing them to quit. There was no room for hesitation or self-doubt, only action and perseverance. Prin, standing beside Rick, scribbled furiously in her notes. Her antennae twitched with unease as she documented the scene. "Their methods are unconventional," she murmured, "but undeniably effective." Her voice carried a note of reluctant admiration as she observed a cadet successfully navigate a gauntlet of moving targets and explosions. Hart, noticing their reactions, added, "We're not just training them to fight. We're training them to survive. War doesn't wait for you to be ready. It throws everything at you, all at once. If they can function in this chaos, they can function anywhere." For Rick, the Live Fire training represented a fundamental difference in mindset. While the Nerone fleet sought to control every variable, humans seemed to thrive in environments where variables were uncontrollable. They didn't just prepare for combat. They immersed their cadets in its most chaotic and dangerous aspects, forging warriors capable of adapting to any challenge. As Rick and Prin watched the cadets continue their relentless drills, Rick felt a growing sense of unease. The human approach to training was brutal and chaotic, but it was also undeniably effective. These cadets weren't just learning to fight. They were learning to endure, to persevere, and to prevail in circumstances that would break most soldiers. The realization struck Rick with a chilling clarity. Humanity's ability to embrace and overcome chaos was what made them such formidable warriors. They didn't just prepare for war. They became war, and their training reflected this unyielding philosophy. For the first time, Rick began to understand why human soldiers were so feared, and why the Nerone fleet might need to rethink its own methods if it hoped to match the resilience and adaptability of humanity. After witnessing the grueling physical demands of live-fire training, Commander Rick and Lieutenant Prin were introduced to a different, but equally harrowing aspect of human military preparation: the stress testing chamber. Unlike the chaotic outdoor environments of previous exercises, this facility was stark and clinical. The transition to this controlled setting initially seemed like a reprieve, but Rick quickly realized that what unfolded here was perhaps even more mentally taxing than the physical challenges he had seen. Major Bryn Hart led the group into a windowless room dominated by a single chair in the center, surrounded by glowing monitors. The atmosphere was heavy with tension as a cadet stood nearby, his uniform slightly rumpled but his posture rigid. Hart gestured toward the setup with a sense of pride. "This," he announced, "is where we test their mental endurance. Welcome to the stress testing chamber." The cadet strapped himself into the chair as the room dimmed and the monitors came to life. A simulated battlefield erupted across the screens. Explosions rocked the virtual terrain. Alarms blared, and voices shouted conflicting orders. The cadet's hands moved frantically as he issued commands and made split-second decisions. Supply shortages, surprise attacks, and civilian evacuations unfolded simultaneously, creating a relentless cascade of crises that demanded immediate action. Rick watched in silence, his unease growing with each passing moment. The cadet's face glistened with sweat, his jaw clenched as he struggled to keep up with the escalating chaos. His voice grew hoarse as he barked orders, his hands trembling from the effort. "What is the purpose of this?" Rick finally asked, though he dreaded the answer. Hart folded his arms and replied with measured seriousness. "We overload their senses, Commander. They're faced with multiple crises at once, forcing them to make decisions under extreme pressure. The goal is to prepare them for the chaos of real combat, where split-second choices can mean the difference between victory and defeat." For Rick, this philosophy was deeply unsettling. The Nerone fleet trained its soldiers to maintain calm and calculated precision in battle, relying on advanced technology and carefully controlled simulations to eliminate uncertainty. In contrast, the human approach seemed to embrace uncertainty, deliberately creating environments where cadets were overwhelmed and pushed to their mental limits. As the simulation intensified, new threats appeared faster than the cadet could address them. His movements grew more frantic, his focus unwavering despite the mounting pressure. "Level 6 is brutal," Hart admitted, his tone tinged with respect. "Most cadets struggle here, but if they can think clearly in this chaos, they'll be ready for anything on the battlefield." The sheer intensity of the exercise left Rick questioning the boundaries of human endurance. In Nerone training, mental sharpness was cultivated through repetition and precision, ensuring soldiers were never placed in situations beyond their control. Yet here, humans seem to thrive on the brink of mental collapse, using stress as a tool to build resilience and adaptability. Prin, observing the scene with wide eyes, whispered, "They're conditioning them to function in chaos." Her antennae twitched with a mix of fascination and unease as she continued to take notes. This level of stress, it's unsettling, but it seems to work. In the adjacent room, the delegation observed another set of cadets strapped into virtual combat pods. Holographic battles unfolded before them, complete with simulated pain, fear, and exhaustion. Hart explained, "We make it as real as possible. They experience everything they would in an actual battle, so when the time comes, they won't hesitate." Rick felt a knot tighten in his chest. The human approach to mental endurance wasn't just about preparing soldiers for battle. It was about transforming them into warriors who could thrive in the most extreme conditions. The line between training and combat blurred, creating a mindset where hesitation and doubt had no place. As the cadet in the stress chamber completed his exercise, his face pale but resolute, Rick felt a newfound respect for the resilience humans cultivated in their soldiers. Their willingness to embrace stress and chaos, turning it into a tool rather than a weakness, was unlike anything Rick had encountered. For Rick, this experience underscored a fundamental difference in philosophy. The Nerone fleet valued control and precision, while humans seemed to find strength in disorder. It was a lesson Rick couldn't ignore, and it left him with a growing sense of unease about the implications for intergalactic warfare. The stress testing chamber wasn't just a tool for preparing soldiers. It was a crucible that forged unshakable resolve. Rick now understood that this mental endurance was as critical to human strength as their physical training, and it was this combination of mental and physical toughness that made them so formidable. After experiencing the controlled chaos of the stress testing chamber, Commander Rick and Lieutenant Prin were led to yet another phase of the Academy's rigorous training program, survival training. Situated at the edge of a dense forest, this exercise took the cadets out of the structured environment of the Academy and plunged them into the raw, untamed wilderness. For Rick, this training starkly underscored humanity's willingness to embrace the unpredictable and turn it into a powerful teaching tool. Major Bren Hart introduced the scene with his characteristic enthusiasm. Groups of cadets were scattered throughout the forest, each equipped with nothing more than a knife, a length of rope, and their wits. The task was deceptively simple: survive the night using only the natural resources around them. Hart gestured to the cadets busily constructing makeshift shelters out of branches and leaves, their faces set with determination. This is where they learn to adapt, improvise, and overcome, he explained. Rick's reaction was one of immediate disbelief. You send them into the wilderness with nothing but a knife? He asked, his voice tinged with alarm. In the Nerone fleet, soldiers were equipped with advanced survival tools and meticulously planned contingencies. The idea of sending trainees into the wild with minimal resources struck him as reckless. Hart's grin widened, his tone almost playful. Exactly. The environment is the best teacher. Out here, they learn to rely on themselves and each other. Nature has a way of sorting the strong from the weak. As Rick watched the cadets work, he couldn't help but compare their methods to those of the Nerone fleet. Nerone soldiers relied heavily on technology to ensure their survival in hostile environments. The idea of depending solely on one's instincts and ingenuity seemed primitive by comparison. Yet Rick couldn't deny the effectiveness of the approach. The cadets weren't just surviving, they were thriving, turning adversity into an opportunity to hone their skills. One group of cadets had successfully constructed a sturdy shelter using only branches, mud, and vines. Nearby, another group was attempting to start a fire, their efforts punctuated by laughter and encouraging shouts. Despite the challenges, the cadets displayed an impressive level of teamwork and resourcefulness. This isn't just about survival, Hart continued. It's about building resilience. Out here, they learn to face the unknown with confidence. They learn that even without technology, they can adapt and endure. Prin, observing the scene with her ever-diligent note-taking, remarked quietly, "They're teaching them to master the unpredictable." Her antennae twitched in thought as she added, "It's a skill that technology alone can't replace." For Rick, the implications were profound. The Nerone fleet's reliance on advanced tools and controlled environments had created a sense of security, but it also meant that Nerone soldiers were less prepared to handle situations where those tools failed. Humans, on the other hand, seemed to embrace the idea that unpredictability was an inevitable part of life and war. By immersing their cadets in raw, uncontrolled environments, they cultivated a mindset that could thrive in any situation. As night fell, the forest transformed into a shadowy expanse, the only light coming from the cadets' carefully constructed fires. The air was filled with the sounds of rustling leaves, the occasional crack of a branch, and the quiet murmur of cadets strategizing their next moves. Rick felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the realization of how deeply this training shaped the cadets' resilience. "They'll be out here all night?" Rick asked, his voice betraying his lingering apprehension. Hart nodded, his expression serious. "All night, rain or shine. They'll come out of this stronger, more confident, and better prepared for the challenges they'll face on the battlefield. This is where they learn what they're truly capable of." Rick couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and unease. The human approach to survival training was harsh and uncompromising, but it was also undeniably effective. By stripping away comforts and forcing cadets to rely on their instincts and ingenuity, humanity created soldiers who were not just survivors, but masters of adversity. For Rick, this exercise represented another stark contrast between human and Nerone military philosophy. The Nerone fleet emphasized control and precision, minimizing risk to ensure optimal performance. Humans, however, seemed to embrace risk, using it as a tool to forge unparalleled resilience and adaptability. It was a mindset that Rick found both unsettling and deeply impressive. As the group prepared to leave the forest, Rick cast one last glance at the cadets huddled around their fires, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Despite the grueling conditions, there was a sense of camaraderie and determination that Rick had rarely seen among Nerone soldiers. He couldn't help but feel that this willingness to face the unknown, to adapt and overcome, was what truly set humanity apart. The next phase of the tour brought Commander Rick and Lieutenant Prin to a part of the academy that was both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling: the live fire training range. It was here that cadets faced the raw, unforgiving realities of combat, testing their ability to function under the constant threat of danger. For Rick, this exercise epitomized humanity's fearless approach to preparing their soldiers for war. As they approached the training grounds, the air was filled with the sharp crack of gunfire, the boom of simulated explosions, and the acrid smell of smoke. Cadets darted between obstacles, firing at moving targets while evading simulated enemy fire. The course was a chaotic labyrinth of trenches, walls, and barricades, designed to replicate the unpredictability of a battlefield. Every movement was calculated, every decision made under pressure. Major Hart, who seemed invigorated by the scene, explained the purpose of the exercise. "This is where we teach them to think and act under fire. It's not just about marksmanship. It's about situational awareness, decision-making, and keeping their heads in the heat of battle." Rick observed in silence, his unease growing with each passing moment. The cadets moved with a sense of urgency, their faces etched with determination despite the obvious physical and mental strain. The range was designed to simulate real combat conditions, complete with explosions, smoke, and the constant bark of orders from their instructors. "What's the point of taking such risks during training?" Rick asked, his voice tinged with incredulity. In Nerone training, simulations were carefully controlled to ensure the safety of trainees. Hart's grin faded, replaced by a serious expression. "War is dangerous, Commander. If they can't handle this here, in a controlled environment, how will they survive out there, where the stakes are real? We teach them to embrace the chaos, to function in the middle of it. Out there," he gestured skyward, "the enemy won't give them a safe, controlled scenario. We prepare them for reality." One cadet caught Rick's attention. He stumbled while climbing over an obstacle, narrowly avoiding a simulated explosion. The instructor shouted at him to keep moving, and without hesitation, the cadet pushed forward, his focus unwavering. It was a stark display of resilience and determination, qualities that seemed to be the cornerstone of human training. Prin, furiously taking notes, whispered, "Their methods are brutal, but effective. They're teaching their cadets not just to survive, but to thrive in conditions where most would falter." For Rick, the live fire training was a revelation. The Nerone fleet relied heavily on technology and precision to minimize risk in training. Human methods, by contrast, embraced risk as an essential part of preparation. The cadets weren't just learning to fight. They were learning to adapt, to persevere, and to trust their instincts in the face of overwhelming pressure. The atmosphere was electric with intensity. Cadets shouted commands to each other, Their movements synchronized despite the chaos surrounding them. Explosions rocked the training grounds, but the cadets pressed on, their resolve unshaken. Hart pointed to a group navigating a particularly challenging section of the course. "That's what we're building here," he said. "Soldiers who can function when everything is falling apart." Rick couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for the cadets. Despite the grueling conditions, they displayed an unwavering commitment to the task at hand. It was clear that this training went beyond physical endurance. It was about forging mental and emotional resilience. As the exercise concluded, Rick reflected on what he had witnessed. The live fire training was not just a test of skill. It was a crucible designed to strip away hesitation and fear, replacing them with confidence and resolve. The cadets emerged from the course not just as trainees, but as warriors, ready to face the chaos of war head-on. Hart's words echoed in Rick's mind. War doesn't wait for soldiers to be ready. It strikes when they're weakest. We make sure our soldiers are never weak. This philosophy, though stark and unforgiving, was undeniably effective. It was a testament to humanity's ability to turn adversity into strength, to prepare for war by embracing its harshest realities. For Rick, the live fire training was a stark reminder of the fundamental differences between human and Neuron approaches to war. While the Neuron fleet prioritized precision and control, humanity thrived in the chaos, using it as a forge to create soldiers of unparalleled resilience. It was a lesson that Rick knew he would carry with him, a profound understanding of the strength that came from embracing the unpredictable and turning it into an advantage. The tour reached its most psychologically intense phase as Major Hart led Commander Rick and Lieutenant Prin into a stark, windowless building labeled the stress testing chamber. Unlike the physical challenges of the field, this training delved into the psychological resilience of cadets, placing their minds under relentless pressure. For Rick, it was both fascinating and disconcerting, a glimpse into humanity's uncompromising approach to mental fortitude. The chamber itself was simple but imposing. At its center stood a solitary chair, surrounded by glowing monitors. A young cadet, his uniform slightly disheveled but his posture rigid, awaited instructions. The room's ambience was suffused with tension, a prelude to the mental trials that would unfold. Hart's voice was calm, yet serious as he explained the purpose of this exercise. War isn't just physical, Commander. It's mental. We push them here to prepare their minds for the chaos they'll face in battle. As the lights dimmed, the monitors sprang to life, immersing the cadet in a simulation of a chaotic battlefield. The scene was overwhelming. Explosions rocked the virtual terrain, alarms blared, and digital soldiers screamed for orders. The cadets' hands moved frantically over the controls, issuing commands, allocating resources, and making split-second decisions. Each action seemed to counter one crisis while triggering another, creating an unending cascade of challenges. Rick observed with a mix of awe and apprehension. "What exactly is the goal of this?" he asked. Hart folded his arms, his tone measured. "We overload their senses. They're confronted with simultaneous crises, supply shortages, enemy ambushes, and civilian evacuations. The goal is to force them to think clearly under pressure, to act decisively when everything is spiraling out of control." The cadet's face glistened with sweat as the scenario intensified. His voice grew hoarse from shouting commands, his movements increasingly strained. Rick felt an instinctive discomfort watching the young soldier struggle against the simulation's relentless demands. To him, it bordered on cruelty. In the Neuron fleet, calm and calculated strategy were the cornerstones of training. This human method, by contrast, seemed to embrace disorder, using it as a tool to forge resilience. "This seems excessive," Rick remarked, his tone skeptical. "Doesn't this level of stress risk breaking them?" Hart shook his head. "That's the point. We push them to the edge here so they don't break out there. In war, hesitation can be fatal. They need to learn how to process fear and chaos without losing focus." The exercise continued, the simulation escalating in complexity. New threats emerged faster than the cadet could address them. Yet, despite the overwhelming conditions, he persisted, his resolve unbroken. Rick couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for the cadets' tenacity. It was a stark contrast to the controlled precision of Nerone training, where soldiers were shielded from such extremes. Prin, scribbling furiously in her notebook, whispered, "Their methods are as much about shaping the mind as they are about honing skills. They're preparing their soldiers to face the worst and still function." The exercise concluded with the cadet slumping back in the chair, exhausted but triumphant. His ability to endure the ordeal spoke volumes about the effectiveness of this training. For Rick, it was a revelation. The Nerone approach emphasized avoiding unnecessary stress, but the humans embraced it, using it as a crucible to strengthen their soldiers' mental fortitude. Hart's explanation resonated with Rick as they left the chamber. In battle, there are no perfect conditions. The enemy won't wait for clarity or composure. We teach our cadets to find those things within themselves, even in the midst of chaos. This philosophy, while alien to Rick, was undeniably effective. By simulating the unpredictability and terror of war, humans were conditioning their soldiers not just to survive, but to excel in adversity. It was a stark reminder of humanity's adaptability, a quality that set them apart and made them formidable. As Rick and Prin moved to the next part of the tour, the commander couldn't shake the impact of what he had witnessed. The stress testing chamber was more than a training tool. It was a testament to humanity's willingness to embrace the harshest aspects of war, turning them into opportunities for growth. For Rick, it was clear. Humans weren't just preparing their soldiers for combat. They were preparing them to endure and thrive in the very heart of chaos. As the tour concluded, Commander Rick and Lieutenant Prin returned to the shuttle bay, their minds heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. The sprawling grounds of Earth's West Horizon Training Academy, drenched in rain and alive with the relentless activity of cadets, left an indelible impression on the Nerone delegation. For Rick, it was not just a training facility. It was a crucible that forged humans into something extraordinary. The cadets continued their grueling exercises, climbing slippery walls and wading through muddy trenches, their faces etched with exhaustion, but also a fierce determination. It was a sight Rick found both unsettling and admirable. Humans didn't merely prepare their soldiers for war. They transformed them, stripping away weakness and fear to build a resilience that was almost unnerving in its intensity. "You've shown us much today, Major Hart," Rick said, his voice carefully measured. He turned to the Major, whose rain-soaked uniform seemed to mirror the cadets' relentless spirit. "I understand now why humans are so feared on the battlefield." Hart's response surprised Rick. The Major's usual cheerfulness gave way to a quiet gravity as he replied, "Fear isn't the goal, Commander. It's just the byproduct of what we're willing to do to survive." Those words resonated deeply with Rick. The Nerone fleet had long viewed humans as a younger, less advanced species, dismissing their methods as primitive. Yet, after witnessing the Academy's training, Rick recognized how dangerously they had underestimated humanity. Humans embraced adversity, turning suffering into strength, chaos into discipline, and fear into a weapon. As the shuttle prepared for departure, Rick cast one last glance at the Academy. The cadets, despite the punishing conditions, displayed a resolve that seemed unshakable. It was a stark contrast to the controlled, precise methods of the Nerone fleet. While the Nerone relied on technology and order, humans thrived in unpredictability, using it as a forge to temper their will. Turning to Prin, Rick said quietly, "Prepare our report. The Nerone High Command needs to hear this." His tone carried an urgency born of revelation. Humanity's unconventional methods were not weaknesses. They were strengths that the Nerone had failed to comprehend. As the shuttle lifted off, Rick reflected on the lessons he had learned. Humans didn't train merely to survive the chaos of war. They trained to dominate it. Their soldiers were not just fighters, but warriors molded by hardship and driven by an unrelenting will to overcome. It was a mindset that made them uniquely formidable, capable of adapting and thriving in conditions that would break others. The realization chilled Rick to his core. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, viewing them as a lesser threat. Now, Rick understood the truth. Humans' willingness to endure the harshest trials made them a force unlike any other. They had turned resilience into an art form, mastering the ability to push beyond their limits and emerge stronger. Hart's parting words echoed in Rick's mind. We train them to endure so that when they face the real thing, they don't break. It was a philosophy that exemplified humanity's relentless spirit, a testament to their ability to face the worst and transform it into their greatest strength. Rick knew that this revelation would change the Nerone fleet's understanding of humanity. What he had witnessed was more than training, it was transformation. The cadets of Earth's Academy were more than soldiers. They were a living embodiment of human resilience, a testament to their capacity to thrive in the face of unimaginable adversity. As the rain continued to fall, Rick felt the weight of the Academy's lessons settle within him. Humanity was not to be underestimated. They had mastered the art of turning suffering into strength, and in doing so, they had become a force that even the Nerone would have to reckon with. The galaxy, Rick realized, would soon learn the true cost of underestimating humanity's unyielding resolve.